With respect to you, it's a little surprised that these weren't acted on when people like you have no idea what the findings were.
That's not correct, Piers.
Correct me.
It's dealt with Home Affairs matters, that's the clue in the name, and the reports we dealt with were involved crimes such as prostitution, Investigatory Powers Act. I'm not familiar with any report that the Home Affairs Select Committee did into this medical exercise, and any decisions as to what Select Committees study are a decision for the committee as a whole and the chairperson.
What is clear, Minister? What is very crystal clear?
If your allegation is that the committee should have looked at it, then that should be...
No, my allegation is you should know an awful lot more about exercise sickness than you do. You're a member of the government during the biggest crisis we've faced in 100 years, and yet you have no knowledge of an exercise that was run at the highest level to prepare us for a pandemic.
Piers.
And the reason it matters... Let me finish my question. The reason it matters is because had we acted on the warnings from exercise sickness, all the warnings that it raised, had the government acted on them, then lives would have been saved. We would have been better prepared. The fact we didn't, according to Panorama, have a single gown in stockpiling is a national disgrace and a scandal that has cost lives.
So we have plans that we have stood up in this crisis, including, for example, the legislative framework that became the Corona Act. We have stood up new testing capacity, we have stood up new PPE capacity, and we have done this on the basis of the science of this pandemic. I think we all accept that these are unprecedented times and that this virus is creating problems on a weekly basis that are emerging in terms of the impacts of the virus. And we are following the scientific advice. And I'm sorry that I didn't know the name of the exercise you're referring to, but I do know about the exercise itself, and I'm clear that we have followed the science.
Okay. Well, since you tell me you know about the exercise, tell me the findings.
So this was an incredibly complex exercise involving government departments and.
I told you that.
Yes. But I know that as well. So the findings are manifold. But what I'm trying to get back to is the fact that...
Give me one finding.
In the midst of this virus, we are continuing to look after the most vulnerable people in society.
Can you give me one finding, Minister? You say you were familiar with the exercise. Give me one finding.
Yes, so they raised concerns about making sure that we were prepared in terms of legislative frameworks and PPE, which
you were aware of that, so why didn't you act on those concerns? Why didn't you act on those concerns?
Which is why we
why are you laughing?
Backing up the evidence. We are looking at the scientific evidence. We are getting together a brand new PPE distribution network. We involve the army. We're getting over.
All right. You know what, Minister? With the greatest of respect, the government keeps sending out ministers like yourself who haven't got a clue, have you? You've never heard of this exercise. You don't know any of the findings. You didn't act on any of them. You claim now you know the findings, but you can't name any. And if you do know them, why didn't you act on them? Do you see how this looks to the viewers?
I think, Piers, people will be listening to the fact that we're bringing the domestic abuse bill forward today, that we're acting to help the most vulnerable people at home, managing...
What about the vulnerable people on the front line of the NHS who are going into battle underprepared because we ran an exercise 4 years ago that the British government never acted on and never stockpiled properly for, even though the results of that exercise were crystal clear. And as a result of that lack of preparedness, many health and care workers have now died, and many more are going to die. And that is a national disgrace, isn't it?
So, Piers, all of our thoughts and condolences are with the families that are grieving at the moment. What I've tried to do is say to you what we're doing at the moment with PPE deliveries, because we absolutely appreciate that we need to get PPE as quickly as possible to the front line. As I say, this is an international challenge. Other countries are facing similar problems with accessing particular pieces of PPE, but we have really worked with medical advisors, but also industry to get the PPE out.
Okay, well, 1 in 4 doctors doesn't have it, so they're all risking their lives today. As our nurses, as our care workers, they're all risking their lives. Get them the PPE, please, Minister. Thank you for joining us.
26, just coming up to 27 minutes past 8. Lorraine is here from 9 o'clock, and you've joined us.
That's shocking. I'm going to get the usual reaction. Right?
Well, don't worry about the reaction.
No, but my point is this.
Can we just talk about it?
Let me make my point about it. People will say, oh, why did you have... Anyone who listens to that minister just making it up as she went along. She'd never heard of that exercise. Well, she'd never heard of any of the findings.
Well, what's
she'd never heard of any of it.
Is that surely the domestic consequences of a pandemic must have been examined under Operation or Exercise Cygnus back in 2016.
Well, that was the point of
she
doing
was
it.
On the Home Affairs Select Committee at the time. I remember last week the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, who of course was standing in for the Prime Minister, was asked about Exercise Cygnus. He said he wouldn't commit to publishing the findings of that pandemic preparedness report, which was undertaken at the end of 2016. And when he was asked if he'd read it, he said it was not something that springs to mind.
I mean, this is just utterly staggering. So we run a massive exercise right to the top of government and public health
preparing
officials.
for what we are experiencing
Preparing
right
for
now.
a global pandemic that started in the Far East. And here we are. We have it. 4 years later.
You'd expect every government minister to be across what it said about preparedness in their department.
And then anyone who watched Panorama last night can see the consequences of that lack of preparedness. We had no visors, no gowns in stockpiles, no swabs, they say, for the test, which may explain a lot of the decision-making about these tests. None of this was available because it wasn't being stockpiled, because even though the exercise has specifically said we should be preparing better on all these things, we just ignored it. We ignored it. As a result, loads of people are now dying on the front line. Our health workers, our care workers. And the government send these ministers on this programme who've never even heard of the exercise that was run.
Well, she said she did know about it.
Everybody watching that knows she'd never heard of it. When I asked her for a single finding, she couldn't find one. Couldn't remember one. She just repeated whatever I told her about it. I mean, literally, I could have said fairy cupcakes, and she'd have said, I think we studied fairy cupcakes. It's ridiculous, and it's offensive, and people are dying. It is, honestly. I find it staggering that more people, actually, are not as outraged by that as I feel. Honestly, how can you have a government minister in the middle of this be so clueless about our preparedness and have no explanation for why we didn't act on an exercise specifically set up so that we wouldn't actually be losing health workers on the front line? And if you're a family of one of those health workers or care workers who died, how are you feeling watching this? I can't even imagine how you're feeling. That your loved ones have gone into this battle without the kit and are therefore being exposed to this virus in a way that kills us. It is a scandal.
Meanwhile, we have British manufacturers who are trying to contact the government because they have the kit, are not getting a response, and then sending it abroad.
To America, right? Yep. Big one on the Panorama last night, sending all their kit, 4 gowns and so on, to the Americans.
Who are also for the Americans,
desperate as well.
Not good enough for us. Let's get on the phone and order that stuff up. Still to come. We're going to be meeting